Hello, everyone. This is Michael Wehar broadcasting here from Swarthmore College's WSRN 91.5 FM. Our phone number is 610-690-5700. We're really excited to have a special guest here, Dr. John Goodman. John, we're so glad to have you, and we were wondering, could you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Of course. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you and to your listeners. And I encourage them, if they have questions, to send them to you or call the studio if they wish and ask questions. I'll be delighted to take them. I'll begin by saying that I am an 82-year-old Caucasian male. I've had a wonderful, fortunate life. I've been blessed in so many ways. My father was an American Baptist minister. I was born in Modesto, a small town in the center of California. My older sister was born in Calais, Maine, which is about as far east as you can go in the country. And the reason is that my father, as a minister, was called to churches, and he had to find churches that wanted him. And so his career bounced around various places, depending upon where there were people who wanted him. My career has been, in another way, similarly odd to describe from an outside view. I have lived a life guided by two or three principles. One of them is serendipity. I always am drawn to that which is interesting. When an opportunity shows up, I like to respond to it if I can. Another is I have been guided by a feeling that was instilled in me by my parents that I have been so lucky, I deserve that luck, but now I deserve and am required to give back to the world in equal measure. And so I have tried to guide myself by doing things that I thought were of value to humanity, to the local community or the larger community or all of us. I have not been guided primarily by making money, but again, I've been incredibly lucky. I had a career that was paying me well enough for quite a while, and then I had a change in my marital situation, which I will explain in a moment. And my second wife, now my wife, was a brilliant, delightful African American lady who had a great job as a top level administrator at a community college. And that was her career for about 40 years. And we have been living on her income, which has freed me to do pretty much whatever I've wanted over the intervening years. So once again, a career built on good fortune, very diverse. If you look up my LinkedIn website or profile, you'll get a sort of a thumbnail sketch of that career. Now, I grew up mostly in Pasadena, California, in Southern California, part of the greater Los Angeles area, and I loved it here. Once again, I'm living not in Pasadena, but in a nearby city, also in greater Los Angeles. But after I had grown up for 10 years here, my father was called to another church in Seattle, Washington, and we moved. And at that point, I was entering ninth grade. My sister, unfortunately, was entering 12th grade, and so she was a stranger to the school, who were therefore ill prepared to help her get into the best of colleges. But she did okay, and has had a great career too. I had time to sort of embed myself in the schools, get to be known, do interesting things. I think I started the kind of thing I was describing early on. I heard about a student exchange program where two high schools in different countries would exchange students for a year, and some students for a year, and they would each get to experience the other country and then go back to their school and share what they'd learned. And I thought that was a wonderful idea. I got enthusiastic about it. I talked to people. The principal called me in and told me I should have talked to him first and shut me down. A year later, I came back to him and he said, okay, go ahead. And 2 years later, we had the program established. And I recently checked back to find out what had happened, because it's been now more than 60 years since I graduated. 56, yeah, it's been well more than 66 years, I think. And I recently learned that that program is still going on. They are exchanging students with a school in Germany. And interestingly enough, the program is funded by contributions from the students. Not something I would have imagined would happen. Anyway, after I graduated, I had the great good fortune of going to Swarthmore College. And that came about through another set of interesting opportunities. I won two prizes that year. One of them enabled me to see the college for the first time and learn that it was the place I wanted to go. And the other one enabled me to go there. I was a finalist in the Science Talent Search, and that brought me to Washington, D.C., and I asked them to send me home to Seattle by train through Swarthmore and Oberlin, which was the other school I was strongly considering. And the other great fortune was I was one of the first class of National Merit Scholars, and that paid for my college education, which was crucial because my father, as a minister, was never wealthy. I would have had no way to afford to go to Swarthmore College without that scholarship. And I was again fortunate. I graduated in 1960, you know, majored in physics, minored in chemistry and math, and graduated with high honors, and got a fellowship, actually two fellowships, to graduate school, went to Cornell University, earned a PhD in physics, and then got a dream job at Harvey Mudd College back in Southern California. I only looked for jobs in California because I liked it so much here. And I was fortunate enough to have several opportunities. The one I chose was at Harvey Mudd College. You may or may not know that college. It's sort of like Caltech without the graduate school, but it's part of a consortium of colleges organized by Pomona College along the general model of Oxford or Cambridge in England. Many colleges, close proximity, students can move between colleges as much as they want. And that has led to some interesting things I've learned about since then. But I just enjoyed having the time, 6 years, that I could teach students, all of whom intended, at least initially, to be either scientists or engineers or mathematicians. Many of them, it turns out, changed their minds during their college career and went on to do many other things. And that was just fine. I loved that too. When I ended up at the end of my 6 years, that was all the time I could stay at Harvey Mudd College because they didn't have any permanent openings. I moved over for 2 years to another one of the Claremont colleges where I was teaching students, none of whom intended to be a scientist or an engineer or a mathematician. And for 2 years, that was my life. And it was also wonderful. And then I found an opportunity that seemed to me too good not to pursue. And I did pursue it for about 3 years before they hired me. And I was hired by California Institute of the Arts. It was a school, the first of its kind, that accepted students only if they could prove that they were already artists. They already had a portfolio of work or a resume, and they wanted an undergraduate education or later on a graduate education in the arts, in all of the arts, so that the college dealt with painters and sculptors and dancers and musicians and people who were intended to make film or theater and designers, anything that was in the arts. Physics was very far out. So I was the faculty member, the sole faculty member who dealt with anything to do with physics or mathematics or any of the natural sciences. But it only lasted a year, and that's fine. And at the end of that, I thought, well, I could look for a college job, but the world is big. I wonder what else is out there that would be even more interesting. I told you serendipity has been my guiding star. Whatever interesting things show up, I look for whether or not they meet my criteria of being useful and giving me adequate support to live. And if I can do it, I will do it. So I was seduced into taking an academic contract, but not at a college. This time it was an alternative public high school, intending to try and serve the students for whom the regular high school was so inadequate that in many cases they just weren't attending school at all. And that was a 2-year, mostly successful experiment. more details if we had the time, but we don't. So maybe another time you can ask me about that. At the end of that, I realized that I had seen a real deficiency in the greater Los Angeles area. When I was growing up, we went on field trips. One of them was to the California Museum of Science and Industry. Now, there is a great Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. There should have been a great one in Los Angeles, but there wasn't. It was a disaster in terms of being a museum. It just failed. And I looked around and I found no museum anywhere in LA, more than 10 million people living in the area, and there was no interactive science museum, even of the size or quality of the Franklin Museum in Philadelphia that you may know. And I thought, oh, there isn't a museum. I know what it should be like. I guess that means I'm going to start it. I have time. Why not? And having never done that before, I decided to set out and build a museum. Now, I did have a couple of advantages. One was a great education, which I've explained. The other was, as I was working, I was invited to be a consultant first to Scientific American magazine, where over 2 month-long stints in the summer of, I think it was 1968 and 69, I learned their perspective on how to teach science to non-scientists through a magazine. So I learned a lot about publishing and a lot about making science accessible to everyone.
I
A few
wanted,
years later,
oh,
yep,
I just wanted to jump in there and say, from the beginning, you're an amazing storyteller, telling us about the really incredible life you've had, and I know there's more coming, but it was just so great to hear about how appreciative you are of the great fortunes you've had, and how you're getting into some of the ways you've been using this great fortune you've had to benefit others, or benefit society. And I know you're going to start talking a bit about how you got into publishing and authorship. And now also you're serving on Swarthmore's Alumni Council. Um, I
those
just wanted
I have
to,
those questions in front of me. Let me finish this survey of my career,
sure, that sounds
please,
great.
and then we'll go on. So, a few years after that, I was invited to be a consultant to the world famous design office of Charles and Ray Eames. I don't know if any of you know about the Eames chair. They had three lines of business. One was high end office furniture. Another was short films, and that's how I met them actually. And a third one was exhibit design for museums. So for 5 years, I was a consultant working with them, doing whatever they asked me to do, and it was all interesting and valuable to learn. And with that skill set, I was able to build a museum that actually was very successful for about 5 years. It turned out the one thing I didn't know how to do was manage, acquire and manage a good board. And at one point, a prospective donor to me was going to give us a big gift, and he said, I need to meet with your board. And at the end of the meeting, he came to me and he said, with friends like that, you need no enemies. And I soon learned why. And they shut the museum down. But then what I had done inspired a new science museum that was of a similar quality. And it inspired the California Museum of Science and Industry to change its tack. And now we have several really good interactive science museums. So I did accomplish my goal, just rather indirectly. And in the end, I was set free to do yet other things. And I will not describe all of those, but they've been fun as well. And now, turning to your question that you asked me ahead about the Alumni Council, let me tell you what it is and what it isn't. When I was elected to the Alumni Council, I had heard about it dimly, but not much. Turns out it is a group of people representing alumni from various classes. I'm not sure there is an alum from every class, but my class has been fairly well organized since we graduated, and we have had several people on the Alumni Council over the years. And one gets elected for about a 3-year term. And I was elected a couple of years ago. Normally, it would meet twice a year on campus, and we would discuss issues facing the college and suggestions. I thought when I joined it that I was going to represent the views of my alumni friends, and then that I was also going to represent to them the views of the college. Neither of those things actually happened, partially because COVID hit and everything shut down. We didn't have any in-person meetings for about 2 years. The first in-person meeting of the Alumni Council since I joined was just a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And I discovered then more of what it is. It's also about involving alumni in supporting the college into the future, which is important. The college requires supporters to be able to do what it does, and what it does is so valuable that it deserves our support. So I'm delighted to be a donor as much as I can, and I would encourage you to think that way as you approach your graduation. You actually don't even have to wait that long. If you have spare funds, start donating. And once you graduate, make donations regularly. You may only be able to afford a small amount at first, but then that will tempt you as you get more money to donate more money. And the college needs that kind of support to be able to do the groundbreaking work that they are doing. And as you graduate and look back on your college years, I hope you will find that you had as valuable an experience as I did, and that it has prepared you so well that you can do whatever you want to. And you, therefore, owe something back to the people who gave you that ability. That's the Alumni Council in a capsule from my perspective.
Well, I was going to say thank you so much for being on the Alumni Council and for, helping to support the college both today with sharing your story as well as donating and with all of the things that you do. And I had the great pleasure meeting you 3 weeks ago, and I just thought, you're really a great example of someone who came to Swarthmore and really valued their education here, and also educated others, and then helped found this museum in California, and started getting into authorship. And so that was one of the next things I wanted to ask.
Okay,
Could you
I
tell us a
understand.
little bit about your journey as an author,
Okay.
and what it
Oh,
was like writing and publishing at first?
okay. I must preface this by saying my experience with publishing has been perhaps not unique, but certainly unusual. Let's go back to where I began thinking about being an author. I hadn't even occurred to me to be an author. But at one point in the early 1980s, I was doing a design project, and it was co-sponsored by IBM. We were designing a museum exhibit explaining economics to the common person. And all of us on the design team were gifted with an IBM PC XT when it was brand new in 1983. And we were building this exhibit to open in 1984. And so I learned about PCs, and I enjoyed them. And I realized that most people didn't understand that. And so I ended up thinking about, well, I got involved in a computer user group where there were a lot of people who had to get a computer because their work was using it, or wanted to get one just because they thought it was neat. And that almost all of them discovered that the first computer they got wasn't what it should have been. It was either too much of something or too little of something, or just wrong. And so I ended up teaching a class about why the first computer you buy is the wrong computer and how to avoid those mistakes. And that was something I did through adult education at a community college. And did that for a while. And then I got a piece of mail about a seminar company that was offering classes for companies to send their employees to learn how to upgrade, repair, and maintain your personal computer. And they were teaching these all over North America. And I thought, gee, that's something I could do. So I contacted the company, which just happened to be a couple of cities away from me. And I sat down with them. And they said, well, we're just marketers. We sell these classes. We hire program directors to design the classes and teach them. And they hire teachers to help teach the class so they don't have to be everywhere all the time. And next time Bob's in town, I'll introduce you. So they did. And almost instantly, he hired me, and I went out on the road with him for a class. And quickly, I perceived that I actually understood more about computers than he did, and sort of taught circles around him when he gave me this chance to speak. And so he liked having me and sent me off a lot of places doing things. And then I got another call from the owner of the company, and he said, "Please come in." And he said, "It turns out we've been sued. Bob didn't write his own workbook from scratch. He took a published book and stole some of what it said to make his workbook. And the publisher has sued us and him. Our insurance company is going to settle the case. And of course, we can no longer deal with Bob. He's out of here. Would you like to take over the class? And please write your own workbook." I said, "Okay." And then I sat down to write a workbook. And I realized that when I did it, it was a lot of work, but it was fine. These classes were 8 hours a day for 2 or 3 days in a row. And they were hands-on, but they were also lectures. And later on, one of the co-owners of the company sat in on one of my days and told me over lunch, he said, "I don't know how you do it. How the students, they give you good ratings, but it's like drinking from a fire hose. You're just pouring information into them. And they're getting lots of experience with it, and they're coming out quite confident. None of our other teachers is able to do that." But anyway, I kept on doing it, and then I thought, only a few hundred people a year are going to see this information. I wonder if there's a way to reach a larger audience. Maybe I could publish it. And I ran into a guy who told me he could tell me how to write a book proposal, and he could get it read, and maybe I could get a contract. 3 weeks later, I had a contract to write a book. This is very unusual. I started writing the book. I was well into it. I had an advance, and suddenly I got a letter from the publisher saying, "We've changed our mind. We want the advance back. Go away." So I went back to this guy who said he was my book agent and told him what had happened. And he said, "Oh my, I should have made it a non-refundable advance. I'm sorry. You need to get a better agent. Let me introduce you to one." And he did. He introduced me to the best computer book author or agent in the business. And he took a look at what I was doing, and he said, "Yeah, I can sell this." And he sold what I had been working on to another publisher. And I did it. And it came out. It was a small book. And it did okay. Interestingly, that was the last time I ever proposed a book. I started getting phone calls from publishers saying, "Would you please write us a book on this or on that?" That doesn't happen. I mean, I was so lucky. I don't know another author who's had that kind of good luck. And so I wrote in total 7 books during the 1990s explaining how personal computers work. And every one of them sold reasonably well. None of them made me rich, but that's okay. They served a lot of people. And that was my goal, and helped them. In fact, I've gotten lots of comments. I wrote them mainly with people who owned IBM style personal computers, PCs, not people who own Macs. But I had lots of Mac owners contact me and say, "Oh, that book was really helpful to me. Thank you." So apparently it worked that way. And most of those books in that field at that time were only good for about 6 months on the market, because then they went out of date. They were about how to use this program, and all of a sudden a new edition is out, or how to repair this problem, and all of a sudden the hardware has been changed. My books were about how does it work? What's the basic idea? And what's going on? And my thesis was, you have lots of computers in your life. Your car is full of them. You probably have a toaster that has a computer in it, but you don't really care. It's there and it works. But a personal computer is different. It is intended to be something that will do what you ask it to do. And if it doesn't do what you want, there are many possibilities. One is that the computer is broken, and you need to know that that's true so you can find out how to fix it or get it fixed. Another possibility is you didn't ask the question right. It could have done what you wanted, but you didn't tell it right. And a third possibility is it can't do what you want unless you upgrade it. So I wrote books to help people analyze their own problems with their own computers and discover which way was it not doing what they wanted and how might they make it do so. That made them popular, and that made them have a very long life on the market. Eventually, the publishers tired of selling them. Fact is, if you go to the website for my latest book, which I'm about to describe, it lists all of the other books, and they are all available to purchase, either as new or used online. Amazon's good at finding books that way. And some of the titles, I have copies here. And if you value an author-signed copy, all you have to do is send me an email. We can discuss it, and I can tell you what price it'll cost. It'll be the cover price plus shipping, and I'll happily sign it for free. But now go on to the last book.
Well,
at the end of the 1990s,
I just wanted to interrupt real quick, if that's okay, before we get into your last book. As a computer science faculty member, I think that's amazing what you were doing, educating people about how to use computers, how to ask it in the right way to do the thing you want. And I also think that's very comical how you said, today even toasters have computers on them. And, that's true. They've kind of found their way into all kinds of devices. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to just recap here. So my name's Michael Wehar, broadcasting here from Swarthmore College's WSRN 91.5 FM. Again, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to give us a call. Our phone number is 610-690-5700. And we're just so excited today to have Dr. John Goodman, who's a special guest. He serves on the Alumni Council here at Swarthmore College. He helped found a museum. He was an educator himself at various colleges and schools, and now he's telling us about his journey as an author. And your most recent book, I believe, is titled "Avoiding the Extinction of Humanity."
It actually has a little more to it. It's "Avoiding the Extinction of Humanity: A Practical Plan."
A practical plan. I'm sorry about that. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the story behind this book. And
yes, absolutely.
Great.
In roughly 2000, I looked back and said to myself, Project Apollo was an exciting time. I lived through that. It started while I was in grad school and continued for the rest of that decade. President Kennedy in 1962 declared to the world, we're going to send a man to the moon and bring him back safely before the end of the decade. When he said that, he and his advisors knew two things. One was it was theoretically possible, and two, no one knew how to do that. So he just boldly said, we're going to. And he even went on to say, it's not because it's easy, it's because it's hard, and it will stretch us and make us do better than we otherwise could. And we did it on time, under budget. It was a success. And most interesting to me, it was not celebrated as a success of America. It was celebrated as a success of humanity. People the world around were excited, hooked into the process, and absolutely thrilled when we succeeded. And they celebrated because it was their victory as much as it was ours. And a part of that is because we did it absolutely in the open. NASA was charged with sharing everything from the get-go, good stuff and bad stuff, and they did, and they still do, and that's wonderful. I thought, it's too bad that all steam has gone out of that. I mean, we're still doing wonderful things through NASA, but we don't have people living on the moon or Mars and traveling freely between the planets the way we thought we would by now. It just sort of petered out. And I thought, well, it's partly because we're doing it the wrong way. I wish I could go into space, but I'll never get there because right now it's way too expensive. It's way too brutal for me. I'm not that physically fit. And it's really a bad idea anyway because it's so polluting. Is there a better way? So that was my assignment to myself. Find a way to make space travel a mass market opportunity. so that everyone who wants to go can go. I thought about that for years, and I came up with a plan. And I realized that it had two parts. Build a really, really big infrastructure, really undoubtedly expensive to build. But once you've built it, you can launch spacecraft cheaply. Instead of being $50 million back then, now down to a mere $5 million if you're lucky, especially with reusable rockets. It'll bring it down to maybe $500 or less, $50. I don't know. It's way cheaper, 4, 5 powers of 10 cheaper. And it's gentle, like riding an elevator, not this several G's squashed into the seat and on the way back bouncing around in the atmosphere coming back. So you can make round trips to space easy and cheap and available to everyone. But that cost, that capital expenditure up front, is just not going to happen. Then I was learning about climate change, and I realized, ooh, that same infrastructure also can be used to solve climate change. And that became the source of this book. I started writing it. I took an outline to my book agent. He said, ooh, this looks really important, but I can't sell it to a publisher because you're not known in the climate field. So why don't you just self-publish it? I'll help you. And he gave me a little help, and I did self-publish it. The biggest disadvantage to self-publishing a book is that a traditional publisher only commits to publish a book that they think they can sell a lot of, and then they do the marketing to make sure that they do sell a lot. When you self-publish, if you're not a marketer, and I'm not, you don't sell very many at all. I have given away more copies than I have sold of this book. One of them I've given away to the Swarthmore College Library. So if any of you listening to this, want to read that copy, you can get in line if they still have it. If they don't still have it, let me know and I'll give them another copy. And if they get too many demands, I'll give them more copies so they can satisfy some of the borrower demand. Or you can have your own copy 2 or 3 ways. One way is you can, as I say, write to me. I'll tell you the purchase price plus the shipping, and I'll sign it for you, even inscribe it to you, and ship it to you. A second way, go to the website avoidingourextinction.com. That's avoiding, AVOIDING, OUR, our, extinction, and spell out extinction, period, com.com. That website is a very dull, static website I created 8 years ago, and it just is there. But there you will see a description of the book, a link to buy it on Amazon as an ebook for about $5, or to buy it as a paperback for about $12, print on demand. Either way, you can get it through Amazon, or you can actually take the ISBN numbers that are published there and take them to any bookseller, including the Swarthmore bookstore, and say, I want to order this book. And if you don't have the ISBN numbers, just give them the title and my name, and they can look it up in books in print, and it's available as an ebook or as a paperback. So that gives you multiple ways to get that book.
Well, I think that's really great. That's awesome how you gave a copy to the Swarthmore Library. So any of the students
and to you.
Yeah, thank you so much as well. You gave a copy to me, and I really appreciate it. I've been starting to read it. And I just wanted to say that's really great. So any students who listen, you can go to the Swarthmore Library and borrow a copy. I think that's awesome. I also wanted to say I just went to your website. I didn't know about your website, but I went to avoidingourextinction.com, and I see a graphic there on the website. Looks very similar to the graphic on the book.
Yeah.
So,
and you'll notice there's a couple of tabs, and one of the tabs is about the author, and it describes the other books that I wrote, and a little bit about me. And the third tab is how to reach me. And interestingly, no one has ever used that.
Well, I'm hopeful after this broadcast, you'll get more than a few people reach
I
out.
hope so.
Uh,
Anyway,
mhm.
let me go on with what the book's about
Yeah,
and what the problems are that we're faced with.
yeah, that'd be
We
great.
only have a little bit of time left.
Hmm.
I think probably all of you know climate change is a problem, and you probably also know that human activity has caused it. And you may understand that it is really a critical problem. My wife complains that politicians frequently use the phrase an existential crisis. And she thinks that most people in the world, when they hear that phrase, thinks, ooh, that sounds really bad. They don't really understand it. I hope that all of you are intelligent enough and word savvy enough that you can break down that word. An existential crisis means very simply, you either solve this crisis or you cease to exist. It's critical to that level. To give a current example in a different field, when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was no debate about will we respond. It was an existential crisis. If they had not fought back, Ukraine would have ceased to exist. It would have been subsumed into Russia, and the culture of Ukraine would have been demolished. So they immediately fought back, and they're fighting back very valiantly. And they're in many ways winning, but not entirely. We hope they will be successful. But that's what an existential crisis looks like. And there's another example I'll point you to. In 1939, the year I was born, a group of scientists, nuclear scientists, had studied the nucleus, understood it, knew that other scientists in the field understood it, realized that Nazi Germany was doing some pretty bad things and had some really bad intentions toward the rest of the world. So the German scientists knew the same things that the US scientists and European scientists knew. So the European and American, Canadian scientists, several of them got together and decided to write a letter to President Roosevelt of the United States. And they said, we believe theoretically it is possible to use what we've learned about nuclear physics to make a weapon that would be unprecedented in its harmfulness. We fear that the German scientists know this too, and that now the Nazis know it, and that they may make that weapon first. And we really don't want that to happen. Please look into this and decide whether or not you guys ought to be doing this now before anyone else. Theoretically possible. We have no idea how, but we think it could be done, maybe. That's 1939. Roosevelt listens, partly because Albert Einstein was one of the scientists signing on, and he was pretty famous at that point. So he said to his advisors, look into this. And they did, and they got with some colleagues in Canada and the UK, and they said collectively, yes, this could happen, and it would be terrifically bad for us if the Nazis did it and we didn't. We better work on this. You may have heard of the Manhattan Project. That was the name that was given to this secret process, partly to mislead people, to make them think it had something to do with New York City, when in fact none of it was happening there. And they developed an interesting two-track way of going about this. They knew they were going to need some very special material, uranium-238, which was not common, or 235, which was not commonly available. And they were going to need a lot of it. Right now, they knew it existed, but it was mixed in with other uranium. They had no idea how to separate it, really. So they made one track was figure out how to purify this stuff out of normal uranium and do it in bulk, at scale, fast. And the other one was, well, how would you build a weapon with this stuff and do that fast? And so Robert Oppenheimer was tasked with assembling all the necessary scientists, and they hid out in a lab near Los Alamos, New Mexico. And General Grove in the Army was tasked with creating this supply chain, and he said, well, we've got two at least methods of doing this, so we'll build a supply chain around the first method and a supply chain around the second, and both of them had build up as fast as possible, and if either of them works, we'll get what we want. And it turned out they both worked, so they got a lot of what they wanted. And eventually they had a bomb built and tested, and two other bombs built that could be used, and in fact were used in 1945. Think about that. 6 years from it maybe is theoretically possible, but we have no idea how, to 3 bombs built and used. 6 years. The head of the UN just told us that their IPCC report, the latest one, has told us that if we do not stop putting CO2 net into the atmosphere by 2035 or 2030, we are in deep doo. And a lot of people think that's impossible. It's only 6 years away or 8 years away. That's enough. It was 8 years for Project Apollo. It was 6 years for the Manhattan Project. If we treated this as an existential crisis, really, we could solve the problem in 6 years. We know how to do it. We know what's doable. We just haven't been thinking about it that way. Now, 10 days ago, there was an article in the New York Times. I sent a copy to Mike Wehar. I'm sure you, Mike, can post it on your website where people can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, there's a man who is a notable scientist named Vaclav Smil. He was an emeritus professor at University of Manitoba, I believe. And he wrote a book called How the World Really Works, the Science Behind How we got here and where we're going. Now, I read through the article and I realized two things. Most of what he says is absolutely spot on true. A few things he says are assertions that I think are false. So I extracted a few quotes, and I want to read them to you right now and tell you where I agree and where I disagree. First one, I'm not talking about what could be done. I'm looking at the world as it is. People have to realize that this problem is unprecedented because of the numbers, billions of everything, and the pressure of acting rapidly as we never acted before. Okay, I understand that first part and that second part, but that third part, acting rapidly as we've never acted before, I just told you we have acted that rapidly before, and we can do it again. How do you understand the risk of climate change? Are we just screwed? The key to understanding risk, forget about climate change, it's very simple. It's discounting the future. People don't plan for the future. They plan for tomorrow or today. People eat bad food, knowing that it's going to damage their health 30 years in the future, but it feels good now. You have to rewire humans to think about the future with as much care as they do about today. So unless you can make it desirable today, you can't solve the problem. Well, there is a way I've come up with that we can make it desirable today and solve the problem in the future. He doesn't know that, so he's pessimistic. I can't tell you we don't have a problem because we do have a problem, but I cannot tell you it's the end of the world next Monday because it's not the end of the world by next Monday. So what's the point of pressing me to be in one or the other of these groups? Either we have a problem and we can't solve it, or we have a problem, well, it's difficult to solve, even more difficult than people think. True. At another point in it, he mentions some people are talking about millions or billions of something, and they should be talking about billions or trillions of something, whether that's dollars or solar panels. He's correct. That's the way it is. It's a really, really big problem. But we're able to do really, really big things in a real hurry when we really, really want to. Then he says solutions never come from the extremes. Oh, yeah. The Manhattan Project was pretty extreme. So was Project Apollo. It's irresponsible to state the problem where, when you look closely, it's not like that. I mean, there are these billions of people who want to burn more fossil fuel. There's little you can do about that. They'll do it unless you give them something different. Exactly. We need to give them something different, and it's got to be cheaper than those fossil fuels. who's going to give them something different? We can, if we choose. He says the realities of the world tend to be unpleasant, discouraging, and depressing, but only if you don't look to doing things in new ways that have never been considered before. And that's what my book was about, and what the book I'm currently working on as a follow-on is also about. Now, to just tell you very briefly what that is about.
Well, I wanted to interrupt just before you
Okay.
start with your solutions. And I just wanted to say I really like and appreciate how you have a lot of faith in us when that humans can solve difficult problems. And I, as a researcher in computer science, I work on difficult problems, and I see students work on difficult problems. And if you get enough people who like that challenge and are organized together and dedicate and commit to trying to solve a problem, I believe we can do some amazing things. So I really appreciate that mentality that you have. Um, and I'm going to let you talk about your proposed solutions, though, to some of our.
I describe myself as a realistic optimist. That is, I'm a realist. I do understand what the limitations are, but I'm an optimist, and I do have faith in humanity's ability to solve problems that have never been solved before, and to do it quickly when they need to. When our back is to the wall, we're capable of incredibly good things. So here is the solution. Well, first of all, let's rephrase the problem. Climate change comes about because we're burning things to get energy. One of the current book I'm working on starts by saying there are three great misunderstandings behind climate change that are dangerous because people believe them. Any of them gets in the way of actually solving the problem. The first one that I'll mention is actually the least popularly talked about, but it is commonly misunderstood. There are a lot of people who think there are just too damn many human beings living on the earth. The earth can't support that many. I think I have factual evidence that this is not true. I don't have time to go into that. There's another link to a talk I gave in 2016 that I gave to Michael. He can post. You can listen to a half-hour discourse about how population problems can be solved. Set that aside.
Okay.
The other two, one of them says, you're using too much energy. Dial it back. No, that's wrong. The only reason humans have thrived as we have and become so dominant is because we have access to lots and lots of energy. We are unique animals. No animal on Earth uses more energy than what they get from the food they eat, except humans. And we use far more energy from other sources than food than we get from the food we eat. So that scales up our effectiveness in the world vastly over any other animal. And we can continue to do so as we learn how to get even more energy. People in the least developed parts of the world are getting about 6 times as much energy from non-food sources as they are from food. Multiply that by about 5 to get to the average for the world. Multiply that by about 16 to get to the most generous supply of energy that anyone has available. That would be the people in, say, Singapore, or in the United States, or in Canada. The really highly developed countries have lots and lots of energy. And the people in, let's say, India want that. So they're trying to get all that energy the only way they know how, which is how we taught them, by doing what we did, burning coal, which is terrible. We need to help them get that energy greenly. Now, the problem is when people try to solve this, they've been saying, and this is where the Paris Accord is absolutely wrong-headed, they've been saying, well, gee, it's a problem we all face, so let us all solve it in our own country, and then we'll collectively have solved the problem. And this is absolutely the wrong way to go about solving any global problem. It's inefficient and, in fact, impossible. Many countries can, with great effort, generate enough energy to replace all of the other sources of energy they're using. with great problems getting it distributed from where it's generated to where it's needed. Huge problems. Many countries, most countries, can do neither of those things. And so collectively we can't solve the problem that way. And that's where the Paris Accord is falling short every single year. What we have to do is find a global way to get the energy and a global way to distribute the energy where it's needed. Now, some numbers are important here to understand the magnitude of this problem. The International Energy Agency keeps statistics. Even the U.S. Energy Agency keeps statistics on the world. And if you look at the records they have on how much energy do humans use, they're talking about non-food energy worldwide. And where does it come from? Maybe 85, 87, 88% of it comes from burning fossil fuels of some kind. It used to be mostly coal, now it's mostly natural gas. A little bit, like 10%, comes from electricity, but where does that come from? Mostly from burning fossil fuels. If you talk about renewable energy sources, and they're talking about all kinds of them, hydropower, geothermal power, nuclear power, solar power, wind power, wave power, add all of that together, and that's 2% of the energy we're using now. 2%. Some countries are saying we're going to replace all of that electricity that's coming from fossil fuels with green electricity by 2045 or 50, whatever it is. Gosh, you're going to solve 10% of the problem by then. Only 10%, because the other 90% is energy directly gotten from burning fossil fuels. We've got to replace all of the energy that we get from fossil fuels with green energy if we're going to be able to maintain our economy and grow it and bring all of the developing countries into the 21st century appropriately. And we can. 2 steps. Well, 3 steps. First step, realize that solar panels on the ground are in the wrong place. If you lift the solar panel up out of the atmosphere, it sees a whole lot more sunlight. Out there, a panel, wherever it is outside the atmosphere around the Earth, spends 1/2 of the time for the year aimed at the sun, the other half behind the Earth. So if you were to cover 2% of the planet with solar panels outside the atmosphere and aim all of them at the sun, well, half of them are behind the Earth. They don't see the sun then, but the other half do. You can capture 1% of the energy the sun is sending toward the Earth. And that is several hundred times more than we need. But we have to get it from where we generate it to where we want it. Now, it turns out that if you're up there, not only can you make the solar panels work far better, but you can also make the electric grid work far better. Effectively, you can get free refrigeration up there. And so you can cool the cables that carry electricity. The problem right now with electric grids, there are about 24 grids, regional grids. They have a number of sources of energy within the grid and a lot of customers spread around the grid. And generally speaking, they try and make sure that the customers are within a couple of 100 miles of a source. Because if it's farther than that, they burn up too much energy in the wires. We need to be able to go not hundreds of miles, not even thousands, tens of thousands of miles from generation to customer, and do it with little or no loss. But we can, because you can refrigerate cables up there enough that you can use superconducting cables. Zero resistance, literally zero. And parts of the cable where you can't cool it that much, you can use even copper, but cool it down to maybe 1/10 of its absolute temperature. And at that point, its resistance is 1/10 as much. And then a 10,000 mile long wire has only the resistance of a 1,000 mile long wire, which is already being used for interconnecting one grid to another. So that's sort of those 2 steps. for generation and distribution will solve most of the problem, but not all, because we use energy in fixed places a lot, but we also use it in mobile applications. Now, if they're short mobile applications, we know how to use batteries, so we can electrify the cars and trucks, and that takes care of that. But if it's long distance, think airplanes and ships at sea, that doesn't solve the problem. But once we built that tall trestles, those tall structures that hold up the solar panels and the grid, we can also build trains that use them. And I won't go into the details now, I'll just tell you that we can make trains that run so fast. These are the ones that are like trains to space for launching spaceflight. But they don't have to do that. They can go from point A on the planet over and then back down to point B quickly, cheaply, and gently. Let me give you a couple of examples. You could go from Los Angeles, where I live, roughly, to Paris in 45 minutes for about $15 a person. You can go from Los Angeles to New York in a matter of 32 minutes for about $12 or $13 a person. We're talking something that's so revolutionary that it would change our economy enormously. And out of that economic growth, we can afford to pay for this infrastructure. Because all that pricing I gave you was based on the assumption that the infrastructure that holds everything up was built as what an economist would call a social good. Quick explanation of that. When you drive to the store and buy some groceries, some produce, let's say, that came from a farm somewhere, you pay the grocer the cost of the grocery store's staff and rent and keeping the lights on, and a little more for profit, plus the cost of the produce itself. And that was what the grocer paid to the farmer who brought it to the store. And they had to pay the farmer enough that the farmer made a profit. Neither of them worried about the cost of the road that they used to get from farm to store or that you used to get from home to store. The road is a social good, and that gets paid for by the government out of taxes on economic activity that results from having good roads. That's a miniature version of the solution economically. So I've given you in this time my vision in broad. It's more than that, but that's enough to get you started.
Well, I'm going to interrupt here, and I just need to do a quick recap. Again, my name's Michael Wehar, broadcasting here from WSRN 91.5 FM at Swarthmore College, and we've been so fortunate to have Dr. John Goodman, and he's been an excellent guest telling us about his personal journey and now his most recent book called Avoiding the Extinction of Humanity, A Practical Plan. And I just wanted to say about your proposed solution, I love this idea of solar panels being up in the atmosphere and all the challenges above the atmosphere. I'm sorry, and all the interesting, maybe engineering challenges we might have to overcome to make that possible. And it's really a neat idea. And if you want to find out more about that, please take a look at his book. So we just have a few moments left. I wanted to ask you this last question. Do you have any last comments or advice for any of the listeners?
Well, I want to say that Carl Everbach and your faculty in engineering is somebody I presented this idea to 8 years ago when the book came out. He loved it, and he has been supporting me with my push to bring this out ever since and is continuing to do so. So if any of you listening know of or know Carl Everbach, you can talk to him about it, and he will explain perhaps answers to questions that may arise, as well as you can contact me. But what is your last question?
Oh, my last question is, do you have any last comments or advice for the listeners or for students who might be listening?
Absolutely. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. Help them learn what you can do. Choose hard problems, figure out how to solve them, and then commit yourself to doing so. You will reward yourself and the world by doing that. And we thank you because of that, for whatever you do.
Well, thank you so much. Again, you've been an excellent guest, Dr. John Goodman. Thank you. We're going to sign off for today, and I'm really glad we were able to have you on the show.
You're welcome.